The song was called Sunny and 75. Try Sunny and 95. Ooh, look at this bait ball. So sorry guys, all apologies. I've got just a couple more things that I forgot in the last video about climate. Specifically climate science as it pertains to the rest of the solar system, other planets, etc. That's so cool. Hey, pishies. Sorry guys, I love wildlife in all its forms. I think these swirling masses of fish fry are just really neat to watch. The patterns, you know, so many patterns in nature mimic other patterns. If you've noticed, the patterns of these bait balls, they mimic the patterns of certain birds. There's a certain bird, I think it's called the starling, that may be found in other parts of the world, but definitely love the oh shoot, which city is it in Italy? That there, some of you may have seen documentaries about these birds that call one of the cities in Italy their home, because you know Italy is a gigantic peninsula, and certain times of the year, of course, it can actually get very hot, but it can also get very cold. And in the cold months, they take to the city because the city automatically, you know, adds another 10 degrees or so. And certain birds, not just birds, certain insects like mayflies, when they have amassed together by the thousands, the millions, the many millions, they take, you know, extremely similar, if not identical, patterns as these bait balls of fish fry do. Exactly the same. You've probably seen it in nature documentaries and stuff. Oh, look, they're right by my feet. It's just so cool. But okay, so anyways, for those of you who are my age or older, or let's say 40 or older, you guys are old enough to remember many different violent swings in our climate. Long before Al Gore's landmark book, Inconvenient Truth, right? And again, I'm not here to absolutely negate anthropogenic climate change. But again, what I'm telling you is, compared to other aspects of climate, it's nearly a ripple in the pond. I mean, ask yourself, what good would any kind of climate science, what good would it be if it didn't take into account the sun, other planets' gravitational pulls, etc., etc.? What good would any kind of school of climate science be if it didn't take these things into account? Ask yourself that and think about it for a couple minutes. It's beyond preposterous. So again, folks, you know, around my age or older, are old enough to remember many violent swings in climate well before the 2000s, right? When I was a little kid, I remember a succession of blizzards that happened, and I was living in Laurel, Maryland at the time, and it's one of my fondest memories and most vivid memories of childhood. I mean, I can remember, I was all of 3 or 4 years old, and the snow was so high that my pop had to go out and dig and dig and dig, and he probably hated it. But we loved it, and we loved him for it, because he would make these tunnels in the front yard that were over our heads. Now, okay, you know, I'm 4 or 5 years old or something like that, 3 or 4 or 5, you know, but I'm more than a couple feet tall. These you know, when he cut these tunnels through the snow in our front yard, the snow was over our heads. Conversely, this is far from the first heat wave that I remember in my lifetime. Okay, we've had plenty of heat waves before people started screaming and crying about climate change. Think about it. If you're around my age, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, whatever, you're old enough to remember many bad heat waves in your lifetime, almost regardless of where you live in the United States of America. And again, conversely, you're old enough to remember many big snowfalls and years where we had multiple blizzards. Okay, so, you know, when I was 3 or 4 or 5 years old and living in Laurel at the time, that was not the only, you know, set of blizzards that I remember. Some of you may clearly remember in the mid-Atlantic states, the blizzards that came, I think it was around 2006 or so. And there were snowfalls of over 2 feet. Over 2 feet, widespread, not just in one isolated spot, but, you know, most places in central Maryland, and I'm sure beyond, you know, south central PA, northern Virginia, so on and so forth. Ooh, there goes another. Look how cool that is. You guys can remember many violent swings. Now, you know, again, I don't have a PhD in this stuff, but I've been thinking and studying climate science for quite some time. Okay, you know, again, the Civil War is not the only thing that I do. Intelligence agencies are not the only thing I do. I also do climate science. I'm quite versed, you know. I'm maybe not quite at a PhD level, but again, I study things in a certain way. I study things with a skeptical eye. I do study things through the lens of science, and I study things holistically. In other words, I don't look at one little facet or aspect. You know, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. We need those people too. But I kind of try to study all the parts, even though it's hard and it takes longer. I kind of try to study all the parts and see how they relate to each other and how they affect each other. And many of you folks who are old enough will remember many periods in the short, you know, span of 50, 60, 70 years of violent swings of all types. It's just so neat. Looks like smoke almost. So I want you folks to think about that, okay? I mean, you know, if what they're saying is true, oh, it's so hot right now. I mean, I'm not talking about, you know, just the last couple of days, but let's say the last 20 years or so. That's bull duty. Do yourself a favor, do some homework, and just look at the record. Okay? So all you got to do, the data's out there, at least for the last 170 years. We have had many heat waves. We have had many bad winters of blizzards, so on and so forth. There are cycles in life. There are cycles in nature. There are cycles in climate. Things wax and wane just like the tide and the moon. And it's not to say, again, that there's no such thing as anthropogenic climate change. And that's also not to say that the current imbalances may be affected by much bigger forces than most people are aware of. Okay? The sun. What, you know, to imagine that the solar effects don't have effect on our climate is preposterous. You are being ridiculous if you don't take the sun into account of our climate. You're being ridiculous. Ridiculous. Think about it. Like I said in the last video, there are solar maximums and minimums. There are planetary disturbances. There are times when our Earth wobbles. So on and so forth. And these things, why they, you know, might have the difference, say in the instance of wobble, of only a couple to a few degrees, that will create a major imbalance or a major change in our climate. And it's ridiculous not to think about these things, at least in addition to anthropogenic climate change. It's ridiculous. Just flat out ridiculous. That's not science. That's seeing what you want to see and repeating things that you have been told. There's a difference. Think about it.